Young women have been growing up with an indoctrination of what womanhood is and what it should be. They've been taught everything that is in direct opposition to the Word of God. Young women who want to be different from the world are rare, but they are real. Join Audrey, often alongside her daughter Graciana and daughters-in-law Kesset and Maureen, who desire to be discerning in a day when everything seems to go against God's design. And now, here's Audrey.
Hey, today is Friday, and it's normally the podcast drop for real questions and real answers, but I reversed it this week simply because a young woman wrote to me and asked me a question that to me was kind of heartbreaking, and so I wanted to address that, and I dropped that episode this past Tuesday. And so today is Friday, and this is the end of our Vacation Bible School week. And you know what? I just have some things on my heart that I want to share because how much life changes, and I think it might be encouraging to you. And I kind of call this the quiet hallways of another VBS season. And I think you'll see what I mean as I share some of these things, because this week, for the first time since 2012, I think, none of my grandchildren walked through the doors of our church for Vacation Bible School. Now, I knew this day would come. I just didn't realize how quickly it would arrive. And you know what? That's the way life is. So many things that we think are so far off, or that we think they're going to be the same, and they just aren't. But there have been so many seasons wrapped up in Vacation Bible School in my life, and still are, because I've still been here this week. But when my own children were growing up, they were always at Bible school beside me and with me and in the classes and participating in the drama. And it was just a full week that we all did together. Every summer brought this week filled with activity, filled with drama, filled with puppets, us working together, songs echoing down the hallways of church and in our home as we learned those. And then, of course, the crafts spread across tables, and a lot of laughter, a lot of exhaustion as well. And of course, the privilege of serving together as a family. I just loved it. We always looked forward to Vacation Bible School week. But y'all, then life changed because my children grew up. They left home, and some years there were no little brogies following me through the church because they were grown. And of course, it happened little by little, just as quickly as my children came into my life. That's the way they left, like little doorsteps and then big doorsteps, little doorsteps coming in and then big doorsteps going out. But once the last one left and aged out of Vacation Bible School, the hallways at home and at church seemed quieter in some ways, even though I was still serving in VBS and leading children's classes and all that. But I wondered, if that season had come to its end. But then, you know what? God in his kindness began another chapter, because my grandchildren grew old enough to come to Bible school, and Jack and Luke were the first ones. And during that time when they were old enough to come to Bible school, Graciana and her husband, Grant, lived here, and they had their first child here, Audrey Kate, and so we served together at Vacation Bible School, and that was just such a blessing. I look back on those 2 years that Grant and Graciana lived here, and it was such a blessing, and I'm so thankful that the Lord allowed me to drink that in, because that has never happened again. I wish it would sometime. I wish the Lord in his kindness and in his grace would, allow something like that to happen again, but I'm okay with that. But it grew. The week grew every summer as more grandchildren became old enough to come to Vacation Bible School. And so what began as Vacation Bible School with just a couple of my grandchildren, then maybe 3 or 4, quickly became something much bigger. It became, for lack of a better phrase, Amma Camp. Now, I say Amma because that's what my grandchildren call me. My oldest grandchild, Jack, tried to say Grandma, but it came out as Amma. Amma, and I loved it so much. I really did. I know when I was when Jordan and Maureen were expecting our first grandchild, their first baby, people used to ask me, well, what's my grandma name going to be? And I said, it's going to be Grandma. But then when he said Amma, I thought, well, now that's my grandma name, because he said it. Anyway, going back to Vacation Bible School, they didn't just come for Vacation Bible School. They came to stay with Carl and me, their granddaddy, and Emma for the week. And during those times, their parents would enjoy a few quiet days together while our home filled with little voices again. Shoes by the door again, breakfast ready at night and prepared. And I had to learn all over again to prepare for everything the night before, especially those years when I was not only hosting my grandchildren for Vacation Bible School, but I was also serving as a main teacher, and I wanted to make sure I got there on time and stayed later to get the children where they needed to be, and then having my grandchildren here as well. But of course, the week was so full, bedtime prayers, those early morning breakfasts, trying to figure all that out, getting back into a groove with that. I still remember how, after, I think it was after the first year Jack and Luke were here, but it was at a time when all four of Jordan and Maureen's children were here. And I would make sure their Vacation Bible School shirt was washed, and I had their clothes and I had their shoes, and I would line that up at the door that we went out of. And then I would go ahead and have a quick breakfast. And again, that was during the days when I had to be here even earlier because I was also teaching. And so I would have, healthy cereal bars and things just ready for them in the morning. But there was, endless talking and chatter. And I remember one year too that my mom drove down and was with us for a couple of days during Vacation Bible School. And that was just so good. And of course, then it continued to grow where more and more cousins, more grandchildren came, and then when they were all here, it was the time when they could hardly wait to wake up every morning to see what the day would bring. Some of my sweetest memories aren't even from Vacation Bible School itself. And I'm talking about the memories with my children and grandchildren. Well, I guess I'm really just talking about my grandchildren right now, but I'm also talking about my children because it shoots me back to the days when before they grew up. But the memories are from our kitchen table, and they're from the things we did in the afternoon. They're from those ice cream runs, and we always had ice cream runs, and having lunch out at a park, or at a place where we could go for a trail walk, or gathering downtown Bay Street, all kinds of things. And the memories of those voices, all my grand girls especially laughing late into the night when they should have been asleep. And then, of course, from watching all my grandchildren and, the cousins, as they call each other, the cousins, who live hours apart from one another, but they seem to always pick up right where they left off every summer, as though no time had passed at all, and they look forward to it. Some years we even had a theme for our week at home. One summer we memorized Ephesians 4:32 together. That says, "Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving each other, just as God in Christ also has forgiven you." And I remember writing that verse on a big poster board and putting it on our kitchen window. And then my grandgirls made posters, and they put them around the house, because I knew that with a house full of cousins spending every waking hour together, I knew we'd all need the reminder. I would need the reminder, Carl would need the reminder, and they would need the reminder. And it became a part of the rhythm of our week, not just something that we recited, but something we practiced, that we needed to practice, and sometimes practice again and again just a few minutes later, because I remember pulling them together at the beginning and saying, a lot of us are here this week and we're going to get on each other's nerves. That's just what happens when you have a bunch of people who have a sin nature, but we all know the Lord, and we're going to trust Him, and we're going to be quick to forgive one another, and we're going to keep moving. And I love that year in particular. I think about it because at the end of that week, my oldest grandson Jack made a video. In fact, I will try to find that, and maybe I can post that somewhere. Maybe I'll turn this into a blog post and put it on audreybrogy.com, and you can read it there if you want to. But here's the thing. As the years passed, I noticed something else began changing. At one time, I spent nearly every moment of Vacation Bible School serving at church. But eventually, I realized my ministry had shifted somewhat. My most important assignment, it seemed, wasn't to be present for every activity at the church anymore, but I really sensed that the Lord wanted me to create this haven at my home, which I tried to do anyway, but it was stretching myself really, really thin to prepare, to teach, and to have a bunch of cousins, grandchildren at my home. Someone needed to make breakfast before everyone rushed out the door, and I didn't want it to continue just to be quick bars, although there was nothing wrong with that. But someone needed to have lunch ready, and I wanted to, whether it was we were packing lunches to go somewhere, or whether they were going to come home, we're going to have a down day, we're going to come home and eat at home and have, different kind of activity in the afternoon. Someone needed to make sure the swimsuits and towels were packed for afternoon fun because, we live in a neighborhood where we have a dock, and my grandchildren love to go down there with life jackets, of course, and with 2 adults, of course, to jump off the dock and swim, and to have those kinds of things ready and washed and taken care of. And that, of course, we kept the bedtime routines happening, and even sometimes, there were times when some of the my grandchildren would get a little homesick, and I needed to comfort them, and I don't know, just making sure that all these grandchildren, worn out from this day of games and heat and so much stuff, learning about the Lord, had a haven, had a safe place to rest, something, just something to come home to. And of course, that someone became me. And I never regretted that shift in the way God led me at that particular time. And I still enjoyed Vacation Bible School because I was here in and out, but I came to see that what was happening inside our home was just as meaningful and just as important as what was happening here at our church. Now, looking back, as I think about this, I also smile because I think about my daughter-in-law, Kesed. Now, I called her at one time my partner in crime. She really was my faithful partner in crime through so many of those summers, because she would come with her children as well and help me. Together we would plan, cook, organize, laugh, adjusted. She became the one taking the children back and forth to Vacation Bible School while I regrouped at the house, and then I would come in later to Vacation Bible School to be a part of it, to volunteer, to see what was going on. And together we made so many memories that I personally will treasure for the rest of my life. Even the time when, we were taking the kids down to the dock to go swimming, and then, we had a golf cart at that time and it died. And then we're all pushing it back to the house. And yes, I have photos of that as well. And I don't know, we've laughed so many times about things like that. But those weeks were such a gift, not only to the children and all the cousins, but to the 2 of us as well. She's also the one, now I mentioned a second ago how it's like it shifted, like my ministry kind of shifted, but she really is the one I credit for that, because she is the one who told me that, you probably need to take a step back from being a main teacher to being the one providing for the children at home. Somehow, even as a young woman, speaking of my daughter-in-law, she recognized that I was spreading myself so thin, because I really did enjoy being all those things, but it was exhausting. But she recognized that I was spreading myself so thin, and I didn't even realize it. Sometimes you're just doing the next thing and you don't even realize that maybe there's one of those things you need to pull back from. I wanted to enjoy the week with my grandchildren so much and have the lessons together, teaching the children at the church, and hear everything that they learned from the day. So anyway, I listened to my daughter-in-law and I did pull back. And then, and it was one of the best things I ever did, because then I was both a part of Vacation Bible School and what was happening here, but I was so much a part of what was going on in my home with my grandchildren. And I love that too, because then at lunch together, we'd go around and I would have each of them share the most important thing they learned in the morning and the most fun thing they did. And I loved hearing everything that they talked about. Those days were so great. And they weren't without their challenges. I don't want to pretend like it was all like butterflies and roses, but there were a lot of butterflies and roses, but there were also some thorns. But, none of the challenges overruled the good stuff. It just didn't. It was just part and parcel of it, and you deal with those as you go along. Now, almost without my noticing, another season has arrived. Most of those grandchildren have grown beyond Vacation Bible School. They've aged out of it. The youngest ones my grandchildren, I have 3 real little ones now, 2 and under, although one of them will turn 3 next week. And then my son Grant and his wife are expecting a baby in September. But none of those are old enough to be at Vacation Bible School yet. And so this year, for the first time in many years, our bedrooms at the house are quiet. And that makes me think about the years when the girls made signs for their rooms. I remember the older grandgirls they made a sign and they called it the older girls, and they stayed in Jeremy and Jordan's room. And then the younger girls made a sign called the younger girls, and they called themselves the 3 Musketeers, and they put a sign on Grace Anna's room. That was really sweet to me that they did that. All the things. There's so many things I could talk about. And I remember too, even the COVID year when our VBS was virtual. My Marietta grandchildren still came, and we did Bible school in the living room, and we even made that year our own T-shirts. It was so fun. But this year, there's nothing lined up by the door. There's no cousins racing through the house and racing through the yard. And by the way, one of those years too, a tree had fallen down in our backyard before Bible school. And so that whole week in the afternoon, the little girls, made it into a little tree. Well, I say tree house, but they put a little table out there and tea parties. And it was just the best thing, playing on that downed tree. It was so great. I'm glad the tree didn't come down while they were here. It was before they came, and it became such a wonderful place to play in the afternoons. But I don't hear the whispered conversations after the lights are out at night. I don't have the sleepy breakfast faces before another full day of Bible school begins. And if I'm honest, I have to say, there's I don't know. I don't want to say a lump in my throat. That's kind of cliche-ish, but there is a certain, I don't know even what to call it. I don't want to call it sadness because it's really not that. I guess bittersweetness. But I guess you feel that, and the reason we know we feel those kinds of things is because when we love people, when we love those times in our lives, it always leaves fingerprints. It always leaves imprints in our hearts and in our minds and in our memories. But, y'all, I've lived long enough to know that, thinking in a bittersweet way, or if you want to even use the term grieving the passing of one season of life, doesn't mean that we have to miss the beauty of the next season of life. It really doesn't. Because here's the thing, y'all, life was never meant to stand still. Ecclesiastes tells us that there is an appointed time for everything. God, in his great and grand wisdom, continually moves us from one season to another. That's just the way life is. And it doesn't, and it shouldn't, diminish our joy in every single season, but it's meant to teach us that he is with us in every single season of our lives, and he is in charge of it, and he is over it, and there's good things in every single season. So, having said that, as I've been reminiscing and thinking about all those seasons in the past, I'm certainly not going to be living my life looking over my shoulder. I want to appreciate all of that and know that there were wonderful things that God did through all of those things. And so my heart and what I want to do is remember all of that with just such deep gratitude to the Lord for allowing it to happen. There's so much I think about. There's so much I think about. But I also want to embrace this past week with Bible school. I've wanted to embrace it with open hands. And I said to my husband on that first day of VBS, when we were in the auditorium and watching all the kids singing and seeing the puppet show and watching the drama and being a part of all of that, I just leaned over and said, it's so weird not having any grandchildren here. And really, yeah, it was weird. And I remember thinking that after my children had left and they weren't here, of thinking the same thing. It's so weird not having any of my children here. And maybe in a few more years, I'll have grandchildren here again. I'll be older. They'll be older. Maybe one day there will be even great grandchildren here if God gives me the health and the strength and the years to be a part of all that. I hope so. Perhaps God will have something entirely different. I don't know. But whatever he does and whatever his plans are, I know they will be good, because I've learned, as long as I've lived, that every season carries both gain and it also carries loss. It just does. We say goodbye to something that was so great and so precious. But in the saying goodbye of something that's so great and so precious, we end up discovering that God is already preparing us for more to come, for the next thing that he has for us. And that's good. It's like reading a great book, and you just love the chapter that you're reading, and then you turn the page and that's the end of that chapter. But then there's the next chapter, and you can't wait to find out what's going to happen to your favorite characters or what adventures they're going to get into, and you love reading that book. So I like to think of it in that way. So, yeah. I'm thanking God this week, and have been thanking him this week for every week that we had with my children and my grandchildren who, as they were growing up, as mine were growing up, and even as our grandchildren, sometimes when they would come and we'd watch a movie in our bed at night, or they would, I would go in and be with them if they were having a struggle or whatever, for all of the reading that we did to them, that we read to them, not that we did to them, that we read to them, all of the things that we did, for every cousin and grandchild who learned to share and learn to forgive each other and learn to die to self, and for every Bible verse that my grandchildren have learned and that I have learned, all the meals around our table and at the park and wherever we had them, for all the car rides filled with so much singing, for every year he allowed us to have Amma Camp. So, that's what I've been thinking about all week. They're just part of this rich tapestry of God's faithfulness, and I'm just so grateful. And the God who gave me those years, and I say me, but Carl and me both, those years, is the same God who is leading us into whatever comes next. And I don't know what that will be. I don't know. But I know that this week has been wonderful, seeing all the children, hearing all the songs, being a part of what God is doing right here in Beaufort County at Community Bible Church. And I'm so grateful to be a part of it. And not only that, I've talked about my children and my grandchildren, but I also want to say that when I look around and see all of the faithful believers who are serving our children at Community Bible Church, it just makes my heart so full that God will continue to use us as a beacon of light to share his gospel, to reach children for Christ, is such a blessing. So that's what's been on my heart this week, and I hope that it has been an encouragement to you.
Catch Audrey and her daughter Graciana live at Share the Arrows, a women's-only conference hosted by Allie Beth Stuckey. Grab your tickets now at sharethearrows.com. If you enjoyed this episode of Rare But Real, share it with a friend. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Follow Audrey on Instagram and Facebook at Rare But Real, and listen to all her messages on the Rare But Real app.